I'm about to tell you something that nobody believed until the evidence was right there in front of them. Something so surreal that if I hadn't lived through it myself, I wouldn't believe it either. But this is my truth. This is what happened to me. My name is Evelyn Bennett. I'm 32 years old, a high school English teacher, and I've spent the last 6 years of my life slowly disappearing. 6 years of marriage to a man I love. 6 years of believing that love was enough to fix everything. 6 years of being gaslit, dismissed, and told I was crazy. And then, 1 second. One single moment captured on my phone that changed everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how I got here. You need to understand how a woman, an educated, independent woman with a career and friends and a life, can slowly lose herself to someone else's toxicity. Because that's what happened to me. I lost myself. My mother used to say that marrying a man meant marrying his family. I remember laughing at her when I was younger, thinking she was being dramatic. Mom, that's just one person's perspective, I'd say. Not every family is like that. I was so naive. So incredibly naive. When I met James, I was 26. He was handsome in that effortless way, tall, kind eyes, the kind of guy who made you feel like you were the only person in the room when he looked at you. We met at a bookstore. I was reaching for the same novel he was, and we both laughed. It felt like fate. Stupid, I know, but it really did feel that way. His mother, Carol, was introduced to me 3 weeks later at a Sunday dinner. James warned me that she could be a lot, but he said it with affection, like it was a charming quirk. She was a petite woman with sharp features and sharper eyes. When she looked at me that first time, I felt like I was being measured and found wanting. But I smiled anyway. I always smile. So you're the girl, she said, not a question. More like a statement of fact. Like I was inevitable. Unfortunate, but inevitable. I'm Evelyn, I said, extending my hand. It's so nice to meet you. She looked at my hand for a moment before shaking it. Her grip was weak but somehow dominating. I know that sounds contradictory, but that's the only way I can describe it. It was limp, but it made me feel small. The early warning signs were there, I just didn't recognize them. Looking back now, I can see them so clearly. The way she'd comment on what I was wearing. That dress is quite bold for someone so pale. The way she'd interrupt when I was speaking to James. The way she'd call him at odd hours and he'd excuse himself from the room to take her call. The way she'd show up unannounced with groceries she'd picked up, reorganizing my kitchen while I watched paralyzed. I mentioned these things to James. Of course I did. My mom's just like that, he'd say, wrapping his arm around me. She's not trying to be mean. She just cares. She's worried I'll be unhappy. But I make you happy, don't I? I'd ask, and he'd kiss my forehead, and I'd feel reassured for about 5 minutes. Of course you do, baby. You do. But the doubt would creep back in. What if he was right? What if I was being too sensitive? What if Carol really was just a concerned mother, and I was the problem? That's the thing about gaslit people. We start to doubt our own reality. We start to question our own perceptions. We wonder if maybe, just maybe, we're the toxic ones. We're the ones making problems where there aren't any. The wedding was beautiful. My mother cried happy tears. James's mother stood in the front row with a smile that never reached her eyes. During the reception, while I was in the bathroom, Carol told James, "You could have done better, but I suppose this will do." He told me years later, laughing it off. "Mom was just nervous," he said. "She always gets weird at weddings." I wore white and made promises I would keep even when those promises were breaking me. The first year of our marriage was actually okay. Carol scaled back her visits. James and I built a life together. We bought a small house. We painted the walls colors that made us happy. We talked about babies, about futures, about the kind of people we wanted to be. I felt like I could breathe. By year 2, Carol started coming by more frequently. By year 3, she had a key to our house. By year 4, she was showing up while I was teaching, letting herself in, and reorganizing things. By year 5, I was questioning my sanity almost every single day. She's just trying to help, James would say. She goes through our personal things, James. Our bills, My mother would never do that. She does though. I've caught her. You're paranoid, Evelyn. You're becoming paranoid. And there it was. The word that haunted me. Paranoid. As if I was imagining things. As if my own eyes, my own experiences, were lies. But they weren't lies. And this is where my story really begins. Because on a Tuesday morning in March, something happened that would force James to finally see the truth. Something that would be captured on video. Something that would be shared by hundreds of thousands of people across the internet. Something that would finally prove I wasn't crazy. I was standing in my kitchen, making coffee, when Carol arrived unannounced. Again. She let herself in with her key, the key I'd asked James to take back 100 times. She was wearing her church clothes, which meant she'd come straight from her morning service. Her purse was enormous, as always, stuffed with God knows what. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said, her voice sweet like poison. I turned to face her, my heart already racing. I had learned to fear these unannounced visits. I had learned that Carol's sweetness was always a precursor to something cruel. "Carol. Good morning." I tried to keep my voice steady. "James is still asleep." "I didn't come to see James," she said, and she smiled. That smile. God, that smile. What happened next would change everything. But before I tell you, I need you to understand something. I'm telling you this story not for pity, but for power. I'm telling you this because there are people out there living exactly what I lived. People being told they're crazy when they're not. People being isolated, manipulated, and emotionally abused by someone who is supposed to love them. If you're watching this, and you recognize yourself in my story, you're not alone. And you're not crazy. Stay with me. Because this is where it gets real. I remember standing there, my coffee mug half raised to my lips, when Carol walked past me toward the kitchen counter. The morning light was streaming through the window, and there was this moment, just a fraction of a second, where I noticed her purse was open. I could see bottles inside. Multiple bottles. "What are you doing here, Carol?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. I'd learned that showing fear or anger only gave her ammunition. It gave her proof in her mind that I was unstable. "I'm visiting my son," she said, not looking at me. She was moving around the kitchen with the confidence of someone who believed every inch of it belonged to her. "Is that a crime?" "James is asleep. It's 7 in the morning. Then I'll wait for him to wake up." She opened my fridge, and started rearranging things. A bottle of juice she moved to the front. The eggs she pushed to the back. "I noticed last week that you're not organizing this properly. Bacteria grows when you don't maintain order." I set my coffee down carefully on the counter. My hands were shaking, and I didn't want her to see. This was classic Carol. She'd start with something small, something that sounded reasonable, and then she'd escalate. I'd learned the pattern over 6 years. I knew how this dance went. "I think my refrigerator is fine," I said quietly. She turned to look at me, and that's when I saw it. Her hand was in her purse again, and she was holding something. A small glass bottle with a clear liquid inside. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. She was right there in my kitchen, in broad daylight, pulling out a mystery bottle like she had every right in the world. "Carol, what is that?" "This." She held it up, almost casually. "Oh, this is just a little something I picked up. A supplement. Very good for the immune system." My stomach dropped. What kind of supplement? The kind that helps people who are clearly stressed and run down. She looked me up and down, her eyes critical. "You look pale, Evelyn. You look like you're not taking care of yourself. James deserves a wife who takes care of herself." There it was. The dig. The implication. That I wasn't good enough. That I was failing him. That she was the concerned mother swooping in to fix what I was breaking. "I think you should leave," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. She laughed. Actually laughed. "Leave? I'm family, Evelyn. I have every right to be in my son's home. Every right." That's when I made a decision that would later change everything. That's when I realized I needed proof. I needed evidence. Because James would never believe me otherwise. He'd dismiss this like he dismissed everything else. He'd say his mother was just being helpful. He'd say I was being dramatic. I pulled out my phone and I started recording. I did it carefully, making sure the angle was right, making sure that bottle was visible. Carol didn't notice at first. She was too busy opening my pantry, too busy critiquing the way I organized my spices, too busy being Carol. You know, she was saying, when James and I were living together, I kept everything in perfect order. The house was immaculate. And then he married you, and suddenly everything is just chaotic. The implication hung in the air between us like a bad smell. Get out of my house, I said, and I meant it this time. I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been dormant for years. Anger. Real, righteous anger. Carol turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something flash across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or fury. It was hard to tell with her. Excuse me. You heard me. Get out. Now. You can't speak to me that way. I'm You're nothing to me, I said, and I heard my own voice as if from a distance. You're a woman who broke into my home and is now threatening my health with mystery bottles. You're a woman who has spent 6 years making my life a nightmare while my husband tells me I'm crazy. You're a bully, Carol. You're a bully, and I'm done. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she smiled. That smile again. But this time it was different. This time it was cold. Calculated. Like I'd just made a terrible mistake. You're making a huge error right now, she said quietly. An error you're going to regret. She put the bottle back in her purse. She took a step toward me, and instinctively, I stepped back. Her eyes followed the movement, and I saw something in them that terrified me. I saw someone who didn't care if I got hurt. I saw someone who might actually want me to. What did you want to do with that bottle? I asked, still recording. What were you planning to put in it? Coffee? My water. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice had changed. There was a thread of panic underneath it now. She could sense that something had shifted. That I was no longer the woman she could control with words and implications. I'm calling James, I said, pulling up his contact on my phone while still recording with another app. And I'm calling the police. The police. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You're going to tell the police what? That your mother-in-law was in your kitchen? That's not a crime, you stupid girl. But the bottle was a crime. Whatever was in that bottle, and I would later find out it was an extremely concentrated liquid laxative mixed with something else, something that could have made me dangerously dehydrated, that was a crime. James came downstairs 10 minutes later, confused, half asleep, and furious. What the hell is going on? He demanded, looking between his mother and me. This woman is unstable, Carol said immediately, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine distress. She's been ranting and raving, making wild accusations. I came to visit and she started screaming at me. I think you need to consider getting her some help, James. Professional help. I stood there, my phone still in my hand, the video still there, the proof I needed. And I felt something break inside me. Because I knew, looking at the expression on James's face, that even with the video, even with proof, he might still not believe me. He might still find a way to twist this into something that made sense for him. There's a video, I said quietly. On my phone. Watch it. I handed it to him, and I watched his face as he watched the video. I watched him see his mother pull out that bottle. I watched him hear her say that I was a stupid girl. I watched him finally, see what I had been trying to tell him for 6 years. His face went white. Mom, he said, and his voice cracked. What is that? Carol's entire demeanor changed. She went from playing the victim to looking absolutely panicked. That's a misunderstanding. I would never. Never what? I asked. Never try to poison me? Because it sure looked like that, Carol. James looked at me, then at the video again, then at his mother. And I saw the moment when something inside him finally broke free from her spell. I saw the moment when he realized that I wasn't crazy. I was terrified. And she was dangerous. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both professional, both taking this seriously. I remember thinking how surreal it was, having police in my kitchen. This was something that happened to other people. People in TV shows. People with dramatic lives. Not to me. Not to a 32-year-old English teacher who just wanted to be loved by her husband. Carol had already left by then. The moment James's face changed when he watched the video, she seemed to understand that her game was over. She'd grabbed her purse and made some excuse about having to be somewhere. James had let her go. I'd wanted to stop her, but I didn't. I was too shocked. Too numb. The female officer, Officer Martinez, took my statement while her partner talked to James in the living room. I gave her the phone. I showed her the video. I told her everything. 6 years of it. 6 years of unannounced visits, of passive-aggressive comments, of feeling like I was going insane. Why didn't you report any of this earlier? She asked, and her tone wasn't unkind, but there was a question underneath it. Why did you wait? Why did you let this happen? Because, I said, and my voice broke on the word, nobody believed me. My husband didn't believe me. My friends thought I was exaggerating. My own mother thought I was being dramatic. And Carol, she's so good at making everyone think she's just a concerned mother. She's so good at making me look like the crazy one. Officer Martinez nodded, and something in her expression softened. We've seen this before, she said quietly. More often than you'd think. People don't realize how dangerous this kind of behavior can be. Poisoning someone, attempted poisoning, it's serious. They took the bottle as evidence. They took my phone as evidence. They told me they'd be in touch. They told me Carol would likely be charged. They told me I'd done the right thing by reporting it. But then I was alone with James, and everything fell apart. He was sitting on the couch, his head in his hands, and he looked like a man who had just realized his entire world was a lie. Because it was. His mother had tried to poison me. His mother, the woman who had raised him, who had made him who he was, had walked into our home with a bottle of God knows what, with the intention of hurting me. I don't understand, he kept saying. I don't understand. My mom loves you. She said she loves you. No, I said, and I was crying now, all the restraint I'd been holding on to for 6 years just pouring out of me. She doesn't love me. She never has. And deep down you know that, James. You've always known that. That's not fair. It's completely fair. I was shouting now, and I didn't care. I have spent 6 years trying to make your mother like me. 6 years of being nice to her, of inviting her into our home, of trying to include her in our lives. And what did I get? I got gaslit. I got told I was crazy. I got told I was exaggerating. And my own husband, the man I married, the man I promised to spend my life with, he chose to believe his mother over me. That's not true. It is true. You did it over and over again, James. Every single time I came to you with a problem, you told me I was being paranoid. You told me I was being sensitive. You told me your mother wouldn't do that. And she was literally poisoning me. She was trying to poison me, and you didn't believe me. He looked at me then, and I saw the guilt in his eyes. The realization. The shame. But I also saw something else. Confusion. Like he didn't know how to process a world where his mother was the villain. What do we do now? He asked quietly. And that's when I realized something fundamental. I didn't know. I didn't know what we did now. Did we stay together? Could we, after this? How do you come back from something like this? How do you rebuild trust with someone who didn't trust you when you needed them most? I don't know, I said, and I sat down on the armchair across from him, suddenly exhausted. I don't know, James. Right now, I just don't know. But here's where I need to pause, because I want to talk directly to you. Yes, you. Whoever is watching this right now. Wherever you are. Where are you watching this from? Are you at home? At work? In your car during your break? Are you watching on your phone in bed because you couldn't sleep, because something about my story resonated with you? Are you listening to this while you're doing something else, but you can't stop paying attention because you see yourself in my situation? I'm asking because I need you to know that you're not alone. Whoever you are, wherever you are, if you're watching this story, there's a reason. Maybe it's because you're living something similar. Maybe you're doubting your own reality right now. Maybe someone you love keeps telling you that you're crazy, and you're starting to believe them. I'm here to tell you, you're not crazy. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. Trust your own eyes and ears and experiences. Because the moment you start doubting those things, you lose yourself. You become a ghost in your own life. I almost lost myself completely. The days after the police visit were strange. The entire tone of our house changed. James was quiet, introspective. He called his father, Carol's ex-husband, and I heard him break down over the phone. I don't know how I didn't see this, he kept saying. How did I not see this? I wanted to tell him that it wasn't his fault. That Carol had spent decades perfecting the art of manipulation. That she had probably been gaslighting him his entire life, making him doubt his own perceptions so that he wouldn't see her for what she really was. But I was too angry to comfort him. Carol called the next day. James didn't answer. She called again. And again. She left voicemails that went from apologetic to angry to absolutely terrified. In one of them she said, "James, you can't believe that girl over me. I'm your mother. I raised you. I've given everything for you. And you're going to throw me away because of some manufactured drama with your wife." Manufactured. That's what she called it. I listened to that voicemail with James standing next to me, and I watched his face as his mother tried to convince him that I was lying. That the video was somehow fake. That I had set her up. "She's gaslighting you again," I said quietly. "Even now, even with evidence, she's trying to make you doubt what you saw with your own eyes." And James just nodded. Because finally, he could see it too. The charges were filed 2 days later. Attempted poisoning. Trespassing. Breaking and entering. Because Carol's key to our house was revoked, and James pressed charges for that too. The lawyer we hired said the case was strong. That there was video evidence. That the bottle had been tested and its contents confirmed. But the legal battle that followed was grueling. It was humiliating. It meant going into a courtroom and explaining to a judge and a jury that my mother-in-law had tried to poison me. It meant having my marriage dissected. It meant having people question whether I had set her up, whether I was a gold digger trying to turn her son against her, whether I was mentally unstable. Even with proof, people still found ways to doubt me. Carol showed up to court looking fragile, wearing soft colors, her hair styled to look vulnerable. She cried. She said she'd had a breakdown. She said she was taking medication for anxiety. She said she didn't even remember buying that bottle. She made herself into a victim. And it worked on some people. I could see it in their faces. Some of the jurors looked at her with pity. Some of them looked at me with suspicion. But the video didn't lie. The bottle didn't lie. The chemical analysis didn't lie. She was found guilty. 6 months in prison. Probation after that. Restraining order that would keep her away from me for a minimum of 5 years. And somehow, despite having the justice system validate that I wasn't crazy, I still felt broken. The week after the verdict, I didn't leave my house. James tried to be supportive, but the truth is, I didn't want support. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to become invisible. After 6 years of trying to be small enough to not trigger Carol, I had somehow become even smaller after winning the case that proved I wasn't crazy. That's the thing nobody tells you about being vindicated. It doesn't actually feel like winning. I had been right all along. My instincts had been correct. The person I was married to had failed to protect me from someone dangerous. And now we were supposed to just move forward? Go back to normal? Pretend that this hadn't fundamentally broken something inside both of us? James kept apologizing. He'd wake up in the morning and apologize. He'd come home from work and apologize. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you," he'd say, pulling me into his arms. "I'm so sorry. I failed you." And I'd accept his apology because what else could I do? But I also knew, deep in my bones, that something between us had shifted irreversibly. Trust isn't like a broken vase that you can glue back together. Once it shatters, it's never quite the same. There are always cracks. There's always the memory of the breaking. My therapist, yes, I finally got one after the trial, said it was normal to feel this way. You experienced a betrayal, Dr. Chun told me during our second session. Your husband didn't believe you when you needed him to. That's a significant trauma, Evelyn. You need time to process it. Time. Everyone kept telling me I needed time. As if time could heal the fact that the person I'd chosen to spend my life with had chosen his mother's lies over my truth. The school called me back to work about 3 weeks after the verdict. We're hoping to have you back soon, my principal said carefully. The staff is eager to see you. But I wasn't eager to see them. Because they all knew. The story had gotten out somehow, details always do, and they knew that my mother-in-law had tried to poison me. They knew that my marriage was potentially falling apart. They knew that I was, despite all evidence to the contrary, still managing to be the subject of gossip and speculation. I went back because I had to. Because I had bills. Because I had a life that needed to continue even though I didn't feel like living it. The first day back, I taught my junior English class on the power of perspective in literature. We were reading The Great Gatsby, and I found myself identifying with Daisy in a way I never had before. The way she was caught between two men, powerless to control her own narrative, desperately trying to make the right choice and always choosing wrong anyway. One of my students, a girl named Maya who was usually quiet, raised her hand. Yes, Maya. Don't you think Daisy was a victim? She asked. Like, everyone blames her for the bad things that happen, but she's really just trying to survive in a world where she has no power. And I felt something crack inside me. Because yes, that's exactly what I had been doing. Trying to survive in a world where my narrative didn't matter. Where I could be poisoned and still somehow be blamed for it. That's an excellent observation, I told her, and my voice was steady even though I was breaking inside. Daisy is absolutely a victim of circumstance, even as the story frames her as complicit in her own destruction. She's trapped. After class, I sat in my empty classroom and I cried. I cried for Daisy. I cried for myself. I cried for every woman who had been told she was overreacting, who had been gaslit into questioning her own reality, who had been failed by the people who were supposed to protect her. That's when I made the decision. I was going to share the video publicly. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I knew what it would mean. I knew that putting my story, putting my trauma, on the internet was dangerous. People were cruel. People would judge me. They would question my motives. They would say I was seeking attention, seeking sympathy, seeking fame. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the only one living this. There were other women, maybe thousands of them, who were being told they were crazy. Women whose husbands didn't believe them. Women whose families were destroying them from the inside while everyone else watched and did nothing. Maybe if those women saw someone like them, a teacher, a professional woman, someone who seemed normal and stable, coming forward and saying this happened to me, and it wasn't my fault, maybe they could find the courage to leave. To get help. To stop doubting themselves. I uploaded the video to YouTube on a Thursday night. I wrote a title that was blunt, that was dramatic, that would make people stop scrolling. I recorded my mother-in-law trying to kill me. The video went viral. I wrote a description explaining what had happened. I included information about the trial, about the conviction, about resources for people experiencing domestic abuse or psychological manipulation. And then I hit publish, and I closed my laptop. I didn't tell James. I didn't tell anyone. I just let it go out into the world. For the first 12 hours, almost nothing happened. The video got maybe 50 views. A few comments from people who didn't believe me, a few from people offering support, mostly nothing. And then, I still don't fully understand how it happened, something changed. A TikTok creator with 2 million followers made a video reacting to my story. She cried while watching it. She talked about her own mother-in-law, about her own experience with gaslighting. She encouraged her followers to watch the full video on YouTube. Within 24 hours, I had 50,000 views. Within 48 hours, it was 200,000. Within a week, it had gone viral. News outlets were picking it up. People were sharing it. Therapists were using it in their presentations about emotional abuse. Women were commenting in the thousands, telling their own stories, saying that watching my video had changed their lives. "You gave me permission to leave," one comment read. "You made me realize I'm not crazy," another said. "Thank you for being brave enough to share this," a third one wrote. And I read every single one of them. I read comments from women in different countries, different cultures, different walks of life. Women whose names I would never know, whose faces I would never see, but whose stories mirrored mine in devastating ways. James found out when he came home from work and saw a news article on his phone. "Local teacher's viral video exposes mother's attempted poisoning," the headline read. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice was careful. "What is this?" "I uploaded the video," I said quietly. "I made the choice to share it." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "Why would you do that?" And I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw a man who was still, even after everything, more concerned about his own comfort than about my healing. "Because," I said, "this isn't your story to control. It's mine. And I get to decide what I do with it." He looked away first. By the end of the second week, the video had over 5 million views. I was a stranger in my own life. People recognized me at the grocery store. They'd approach me with tears in their eyes, wanting to share their stories, wanting to touch my arm like I was some kind of healer. Some wanted to thank me. Others wanted to tell me I was brave. A few wanted to tell me I was selfish for putting my family's business on the internet. One woman stopped me in the produce section while I was reaching for tomatoes. "You probably don't remember me," she said, and her voice was shaking. "But we went to high school together. And I just want you to know that your video saved my life. Literally saved it. I was planning to. I was going to hurt myself because my husband kept telling me I was crazy, and then I watched your video, and I realized I wasn't. I left him. I'm in a shelter now with my kids, and I'm alive because of you." I stood there, a tomato in each hand, and I cried in front of a stranger in the produce section of my local grocery store. These moments should have felt healing. They should have felt like validation. They should have felt like my sacrifice, because that's what it was, a sacrifice of my privacy, my dignity, my safety, meant something. But mostly, they just felt heavy. The comments online were a mixed bag. For every person thanking me, there was someone calling me a liar, a fame seeker, a woman who had set up her mother-in-law for attention. There were people who said I should have handled it privately. People who said I was destroying my family for clout. People who analyzed every frame of the video, looking for inconsistencies, looking for proof that I was making it up. One comment particularly haunted me: "If this really happened, why is she smiling in that video? Real victims don't smile." I wasn't smiling in the video. But apparently, my face, existing, breathing, living, was enough for people to project their disbelief onto. Dr. Chun warned me about the dangers of reading the comments. "Your brain is looking for validation," she said during our weekly session. "But the internet is not a healthy source of validation. You need to protect yourself." But I couldn't stop reading them. I was addicted to the engagement, to the proof that I mattered, even if that proof came mixed with vitriol and hate. My marriage, meanwhile, was deteriorating in real time. James couldn't understand why I wouldn't take the video down. "It's humiliating," he'd say. "For me. For my career. My colleagues know about this. My boss asked me about it." "I'm sorry your colleagues know that your mother tried to poison your wife," I said flatly. "That must be so difficult for you." "That's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair, James. None of it." We weren't fighting so much as we were existing in a state of cold, uncomfortable distance. We slept in the same bed but didn't touch. We ate at the same table but didn't speak. We were two people pretending to be a couple while our marriage slowly decomposed around us. One night, I found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m, drinking straight from a bottle of whiskey. "James." He looked up at me, and I barely recognized the expression on his face. It was raw. Broken. Lost. My mother called, he said quietly. From prison. She said you're a liar. She said you set her up. She said I was a weak man for believing you over her. And what do you think? I asked. He looked down at the bottle in his hands. I don't know anymore, he said. I don't know what I think. I don't know what's real. I don't know if my marriage is real or if it's all just a story you've been telling me. I felt something die inside me in that moment. If you have to ask whether our marriage is real, I said quietly, then maybe it isn't. The interview requests started coming in after the first 1,000,000 views. Morning shows wanted me on. Podcasts wanted to feature my story. A book publisher reached out asking if I'd consider writing a memoir. It was surreal. A month ago, I was an invisible woman being slowly poisoned by my mother-in-law while everyone told me I was crazy. Now I was a symbol. A cautionary tale. A rallying cry for women everywhere. I said yes to most of them. I did a morning show interview where the host cried while talking to me. I was on a podcast with 3 million listeners where I talked for 2 hours about gaslighting and manipulation and the specific ways that family dynamics can be weaponized against you. I felt powerful in those moments. I felt like my voice finally mattered. But then I'd come home to a husband who could barely look at me. You're enjoying this, he said one night after I'd finished recording a podcast episode in our bedroom. Enjoying what? This. Being famous. Being the victim. You love it. That's not true. It is true. You're on the internet every single day now. You're being interviewed. People know who you are. And meanwhile, I'm drowning. My mother is in prison. My family is destroyed. And you're having the time of your life. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that I wasn't enjoying any of this. That every interview was a razor blade across my heart. That reliving the moment his mother tried to poison me over and over again wasn't empowering. It was re-traumatizing. But I also understood in that moment that James was grieving. He was mourning the mother he'd thought he had, the family he'd thought was normal. He was angry at me, yes, but he was also angry at himself. At his blindness. At his failure to protect me. And we were both too broken to help each other heal. 3 months after the video went viral, I made another video. This one was titled My Marriage is Ending, and Why That's Okay. I sat in front of my camera, the same camera I'd used to record the previous videos, and I was honest. Completely, devastatingly honest. I talked about how James and I had tried to make it work, but how the betrayal was too deep. How you can't rebuild trust once it's shattered. How sometimes, loving someone isn't enough. I want to say something to anyone watching this who is in a relationship with someone who doesn't believe you, who doesn't protect you, who makes you doubt your own reality, I said, and I could feel the tears coming, but I didn't stop them. Your love is not enough. Your effort is not enough. Their belief in you has to matter. Their willingness to stand by you has to mean something. And if it doesn't, then you have to ask yourself if you're willing to spend the rest of your life trying to convince someone of your own existence. I chose myself, I continued. It took me 6 years to do it, but I finally chose myself. And that's what I want for you too. I want you to choose yourself. Not because it's easy. Not because it will make everyone happy. But because your life, your mental health, your sense of reality, those things matter more than any relationship. They have to. The video got 3 million views in the first week. And James moved out. He left a note on the kitchen counter. I need space to figure out who I am without my mother in my head. And I don't think I can do that while I'm with you. Every time I look at you, I see my own failure. I'm sorry. I read it once, and then I burned it in the sink. I didn't cry. I was too numb to cry. I was just empty. The victory I had fought so hard for, the proof that I wasn't crazy, the vindication, the justice, it had cost me my marriage. But it had also saved my life. And maybe that was enough. That night, I made tea and sat on my couch and watched the comments pour in on my latest video. Thousands of them. Women telling me that watching me choose myself had given them permission to do the same. Women saying they'd left their husbands, their families, toxic situations that were slowly killing them. One comment, from a woman named Sarah, read, "I watched your first video 6 months ago. I was living with my mother-in-law, being told I was crazy every single day. You made me realize I could leave. I did. I've been in therapy, rebuilding my life, and I'm the happiest I've ever been. Thank you for showing me that there's life after this." And I read that comment, and I finally felt something shift. The weight I'd been carrying, the guilt about my marriage ending, the shame about going public with my trauma, the fear that I'd made the wrong choice, it lifted slightly. Not completely, but slightly. Maybe that was enough too. 6 months after James left, I was a different person. Not better. Not yet. But different. There's something about being completely alone that forces you to figure out who you actually are, separate from everyone else's expectations, demands, and narratives. I'd taken a leave of absence from teaching. My principal had been supportive, more supportive than I expected, honestly. "Take all the time you need," she'd said. "Your mental health comes first." The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, I was being told by my husband that I was mentally unstable. Now my employer was prioritizing my mental health. It was like the universe had finally decided to validate what I'd known all along. I used the time to do things I hadn't done in years. I read books without feeling guilty. I took walks without feeling like I needed to hurry home. I sat in cafes and wrote in a journal, not for anyone else to read but just for me. Pages and pages of thoughts and feelings and observations that belonged entirely to myself. My therapist, Dr. Chun, kept encouraging me to do something she called rediscovering yourself. "You spent 6 years of your life as someone's wife," she said during one of our sessions. "Before that, you spent years as someone's girlfriend. And before that, you were someone's daughter, someone's student, someone's friend. When do you get to just be Evelyn?" "I don't know how to be just Evelyn," I admitted. "Then maybe that's what we need to figure out together." So that's what we did. We figured it out slowly, piece by piece. I discovered that I loved painting. I'd never painted before. James said he didn't like the smell of paint, so I never tried. But now I bought supplies and covered an entire wall of my living room with a mural. It was abstract, chaotic, full of angry reds and healing blues and surprising golds. It wasn't beautiful in a conventional way, but it was honest. It was me. I reconnected with friends I'd abandoned over the years, too focused on my marriage to maintain other relationships. Sarah, my closest friend from college, came over one afternoon and we talked for 6 hours straight. She cried when I told her everything. She held my hand and said, "I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I should have paid closer attention." "You couldn't have known," I told her. "I was hiding it. I was hiding it so well that I didn't even know it was happening. But I should have known you well enough to notice you disappearing." We both cried then, mourning the years we'd lost to my marriage, to my fear, to my desperate attempt to be someone I wasn't. The comments on my videos continued to evolve. At first, they were mostly supportive, women sharing their own stories, thanking me for giving them courage. But as more time passed, something shifted. People started asking me for advice. They started treating me like an expert on trauma, on relationships, on recovery. I wasn't an expert. I was just a woman who had lived through something terrible and decided to talk about it publicly. But I tried to help anyway. I answered comments when I could. I recommended resources for women in abusive situations. I shared information about therapy, about restraining orders, about support groups. I tried to use the platform that had been handed to me for something meaningful. And slowly, without realizing it was happening, I started to heal. 9 months after James left, I ran into him at the grocery store. It was in the produce section, of all places, the same produce section where a stranger had thanked me for saving her life. Fate has a weird sense of humor. He looked different. Thinner. Older somehow, even though it had only been 9 months. He was reaching for apples when he saw me, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, shame, longing, resignation. "Evelyn," he said. "James." We stood there, two people who had promised to spend the rest of their lives together, now barely able to make eye contact in the produce section. "I've been watching your videos," he said quietly. "Oh." I needed to understand. I needed to see what I'd missed. What I'd failed to see. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to scream at him. Part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me wanted to walk away without saying anything at all. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I said, and I realized it was true. "I'm actually good, James. For the first time in a very long time, I'm actually good." "I'm glad," he said, and I believed him. "I'm in therapy now. I'm trying to understand why I was so willing to dismiss you, why I was so devoted to my mother even when she was clearly—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. "You were conditioned. You were gaslit by your own mother for your entire life. You didn't know any better. That doesn't excuse it." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. But understanding it is the first step toward healing." He nodded, and we stood there for a moment longer, two people separated by more than just physical distance now. We were separated by everything that had happened, everything we couldn't undo, everything we'd learned about each other and ourselves. "I'm happy for you," he said finally. "I mean that. You're strong, Evelyn. You always were. I didn't know it until it was too late." "Thank you," I said. "And I hope you find happiness too, James. Real happiness. Not the kind that comes from pleasing your mother, but the kind that comes from knowing who you are." He smiled sadly. "That sounds like something you'd teach in an English class." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe I will." And then he walked away, and I continued shopping, and my heart broke a little. Not because I wanted him back, but because I was grieving what could have been if things had been different. If he had been different. If I had been brave enough sooner. But I didn't spiral. I didn't fall apart. I picked out my apples, paid for my groceries, and went home to my painted wall and my journal and my life that finally belonged to me. That night, I recorded another video. "I want to talk about something that people don't usually talk about," I began, looking directly at the camera. "I want to talk about the grief that comes with choosing yourself. When you leave a toxic situation, when you finally extract yourself from someone else's narrative, there's this expectation that you should feel relief. That you should feel liberated. And you do feel those things, yes. But you also feel sadness. You grieve the life you thought you were going to have. You grieve the person you thought your partner was. You grieve the years you lost trying to make something work that was broken from the beginning. And that's okay. That grief is valid. It's not a sign that you made the wrong choice. It's a sign that you're human. You invested in something, and when it didn't work out, part of you died. And you're allowed to mourn that. But here's what I want you to know. On the other side of that grief, there's freedom. There's the discovery of who you really are when you're not trying to be what someone else needs you to be. There's the joy of making decisions for yourself. There's the peace of not being constantly gaslit, constantly doubted, constantly told that you're crazy. I would go through all of it again, I said, and I could feel the truth of it in my bones, if it led me here. To this place. To myself. The video got 4 million views in the first week. And I didn't care about the view count anymore. I didn't care about the comments or the engagement or becoming more famous. I made the video because I needed to say those words. I needed to hear myself say them. The healing was happening. Not in a linear way. Not in a way where I woke up one day completely over everything. But it was happening. And that was enough. 1 year after uploading that first video, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Not because I looked different physically, though I suppose I did. I'd gained weight in places that made me feel stronger. I'd stopped wearing makeup every single day because I realized I didn't need it to feel valid. My hair, which I'd kept in a neat, controlled bob for years, was now longer, wilder, full of layers that caught the light differently depending on how I moved. But the real difference was in my eyes. There was something behind them now that hadn't been there before. Not hardness. I wasn't looking to become a hard woman. But there was clarity. There was knowledge. There was the understanding that I had survived something that could have destroyed me, and I was still here. Still breathing. Still becoming. I'd returned to teaching 3 months earlier, and it was strange how normal it felt. Like my life had shifted on its axis, but the basic routines could still function. I could still teach The Great Gatsby, and discuss the symbolism of the green light. I could still give assignments and grade papers and have conversations with students about their college dreams. But I was different with my students now. I was more honest. When we talked about toxic relationships in literature, I didn't hide behind academic distance. I let them see that I understood on a personal level what it meant to be trapped, to be gaslit, to lose yourself trying to save someone else. Maya, the girl who'd made that comment about Daisy being a victim, came to see me during office hours. "I wanted to tell you," she said quietly, "that your story changed my life. I watched your videos, and I realized that my boyfriend was doing to me what that woman was doing to you. He was telling me I was crazy. He was making me feel like everything was my fault." "What did you do?" I asked, already knowing the answer somehow. "I left him. Last month. I'm living with my mom again, and I'm in therapy, and I'm learning who I am without him. And I wanted to thank you. For being brave enough to share. For showing me that I could leave too." I cried during that conversation. Not sad tears. Healing tears. The kind that come when you realize your pain had meaning. When you realize that by being vulnerable, by telling your story, you've helped someone else find their way out of the darkness. "You're brave," I told her. "Don't forget that. You saw something toxic and you had the courage to walk away. That took strength." She smiled, really smiled, not the fake smile she'd been wearing in class all year, and I saw something shift in her face. She was becoming herself too. The book deal came through in month 11 after the video went viral. A major publisher wanted me to write a full memoir. They offered an advance that made my hands shake when I saw the number. They wanted me to tell the complete story, not just the dramatic moment captured on video, but everything. The 6 years. The gaslighting. The slow erosion of my sense of reality. The moment I decided I was worth more than this. I should have been excited. Most people would have been thrilled. Instead, I felt a wave of panic. What if I can't do it justice? I asked Dr. Chun during our session. "What do you mean? What if by putting it in a book, I somehow make it less real? What if people read it and think it's fiction? What if I miss something important? What if someone—" "Evelyn," she interrupted gently. "You're catastrophizing. That's the anxiety talking." "I know, but why are you really afraid?" I sat with that question for a long moment. Why was I afraid? "Because," I said slowly, "once I write it down, once I make it permanent, it becomes a thing that happened to me forever. Right now, I can still pretend parts of it were a dream. But a book makes it real in a way I'm not sure I'm ready for." Dr. Chun nodded. "That's valid. But I'd argue that it's already real. You've already acknowledged it. You've already survived it. Writing it down doesn't make it more real, it just gives it a different form." I signed the contract 3 weeks later. Writing the memoir was like reliving my trauma in slow motion. I'd sit at my desk with a cup of coffee and write about the early days of my relationship with James, trying to capture the exact moment when I should have seen the red flags about his relationship with his mother. I'd write about the small betrayals, how he'd side with Carol over me when I complained about her comments, how he'd dismiss my concerns as jealousy. But I'd also write about the good moments. Because the truth is, it wasn't all bad. If it had been all bad, I would have left sooner. The insidious nature of emotional abuse is that it's mixed in with love and kindness and moments of genuine connection. That's what makes it so hard to leave. That's what keeps people trapped. I wrote about the night James told me he loved me in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, a trip his mother had actually paid for but made sure to remind me of constantly. I wrote about his laugh, about the way he looked at me during our wedding, about the plans we'd made for children and a future that would never happen. And I wrote about the moment everything fell apart, over and over again, trying to capture the exact feeling of realization. The moment when you understand that the person you trusted most has chosen not to believe you. My editor, a woman named Margaret who had her own story of abuse that she shared with me, kept pushing me to dig deeper. "Don't just tell us what happened," she'd write in her notes. Tell us what it felt like. Make us feel the gaslighting. Make us experience the self-doubt. Make this book something that people can't put down because they see themselves in it. And I did. I poured everything into those pages. Every doubt I'd had about my sanity. Every moment I'd questioned whether I was overreacting. Every time I'd apologized for things I hadn't done wrong. The memoir became a bloodletting. Page after page of raw, honest truth. 2 months before the memoir was set to be published, I received a letter from Carol's lawyer. She was suing me for defamation. Apparently, the viral videos and the upcoming book were damaging her reputation, and she wanted financial compensation. The letter was 15 pages long and detailed all the ways I had supposedly lied about her, exaggerated her actions, and maliciously tried to turn her son against her. I sat in my kitchen and read that letter 3 times, and I felt something crack inside me. All the progress I'd made, all the healing, all the work I'd done in therapy, it suddenly felt fragile. Temporary. Like I was about to lose everything all over again. I called my lawyer immediately. "This is a bullshit suit," he said bluntly. "She was convicted, Evelyn. You have video evidence. You have legal documentation of what happened. She doesn't have a case." "But what if she does? What if a judge decides?" "A judge won't. Trust me. But I understand why you're scared. This feels like she's still trying to control the narrative. Like she's still trying to make you doubt yourself." "Yes," I said quietly. "That's exactly what it feels like." "Well, she's not going to win. But we need to fight back. And we need to be smart about how we do it." That night, I recorded a video. Not for YouTube. Not for public consumption. For me. I sat in front of the camera with my hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing an old t-shirt, and I let myself fall apart. "Carol is suing me for telling the truth," I said, and my voice was shaking. "She's in prison for trying to poison me, and now she's trying to sue me for daring to talk about it. And I'm scared. I'm scared that somehow, some way, she's going to win. That she's going to destroy my life again." I paused, breathing through the panic. But then I remember something. I have video. I have evidence. I have a conviction. I have the testimony of police officers and forensic experts and a jury of 12 people who looked at the facts and said, yes, Carol Bennett is guilty. And no matter how many letters her lawyer sends, that truth doesn't change. "I won't be silenced," I continued, and I could feel the strength returning to my voice. Not by her. Not by anyone. I spent 6 years being silenced, being told I was crazy, being gaslit into doubting my own reality. I will not spend another day giving her that power. I didn't upload that video. I just watched it alone, and I let it remind me of who I'd become. A woman who was no longer afraid. The court case, when it finally happened 3 months later, was anticlimactic. The judge dismissed the suit within the first hour. "The defendant," he said, looking directly at Carol's lawyer, "has been convicted of attempting to poison the plaintiff." The plaintiff's account of events, supported by video evidence and legal documentation, is factual. There is no defamation when you are telling the truth. Carol sat in the courtroom looking smaller than I remembered. Prison had changed her. But more than that, I realized that she no longer had power over me. I could look at her without feeling that paralyzing fear. I could acknowledge her existence without losing myself. After the ruling, I stood outside the courthouse, and reporters rushed toward me. They wanted a statement. They wanted to know how I felt about the victory. "I feel relieved," I told them. "But more than that, I feel validated. Not because a judge said it, but because I already knew the truth. I lived through it. No lawsuit, no denial, no lie can change that." That night, I sat at my computer and I finished the memoir. The last chapter wasn't about the court victory. It was about something more important. It was about learning to love myself. The memoir was released on a Tuesday morning in October. I woke up at 5 in the morning and couldn't go back to sleep. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. Today was the day that my entire trauma, my entire life, would be available for anyone and everyone to read and judge and dissect. I made coffee and sat on my couch and refreshed the Amazon page obsessively, watching the ranking climb. Number 1 in memoirs. Number 3 in bestsellers. Within the first hour, it was trending on Twitter. By noon, my phone was exploding with notifications. Publishers wanted to know about foreign rights. Talk show hosts wanted to book me. People from my past, people I hadn't heard from in years, were reaching out to say they'd pre-ordered the book. And then the reviews started coming in. A powerful and devastating account of emotional abuse, one reviewer wrote. Bennett's honesty is gut-wrenching and necessary. Finally, a memoir that doesn't shy away from the complexity of leaving someone you love, another said. But there were also the negative ones. This woman is a liar trying to make money off her family's pain, someone wrote. Her husband deserves better than this public humiliation. Seems like she just wanted attention. Why else would she put this all on the internet? Another review stated. I read every single one. Every positive word felt like fuel. Every negative word felt like a knife. Dr. Chun had warned me about this. Once you put your story out into the world, it becomes the world's story, she'd said. People will interpret it through their own biases, their own experiences, their own damage. You can't control that. You can only control whether you let it destroy you. But it was hard. It was so hard not to spiral when someone told me I was a liar, that I was making it up for attention, that my trauma wasn't real. Sarah came over that night and found me sitting in the dark, my phone face down on the couch next to me. Stop reading the reviews, she said immediately. I can't. You can. You have to. Your book is beautiful, Evelyn. It's honest and raw and important. But not everyone is going to get it. And that's okay. But what if the people who don't get it are right? What if I'm the problem? What if? Stop. She sat down next to me and took my hands. Listen to me. You have a conviction. You have video evidence. You have the validation of an entire legal system. Your story is true, and no review, no matter how harsh, changes that. I leaned my head on her shoulder, and we sat like that for a long time, not talking, just existing in the quiet together. The book tour started in November. I flew to 12 different cities in 3 weeks. I did book signings where women lined up for hours to meet me, to thank me, to share their own stories. I did radio interviews at 6 in the morning. I did podcast recordings that went late into the night. I stood in front of audiences and talked about the most painful moments of my life while people took notes and nodded and cried. It should have felt empowering. And parts of it did. But parts of it felt like I was performing my trauma. Like I was turning my pain into entertainment, into a product to be consumed. Like by sharing my story so publicly, I was somehow cheapening it. In Portland, a woman came up to me after a book signing with her teenage daughter. My mom just read your book, the girl said, and it made her leave my dad. She said he was gaslighting her like your husband was. She's been gone for 2 weeks, and I don't know if that's good or bad. My heart broke for her. It's good, I said, kneeling down to look her in the eye. It might not feel good right now. It probably feels scary and confusing. But your mom is choosing her own mental health. She's choosing not to stay in a situation that was hurting her. That's brave. And you get to be proud of her. The girl nodded, but her eyes were still uncertain. That night, I called Dr. Chun from my hotel room in Portland. I feel responsible for their family falling apart, I told her. Are you responsible? No, but... Then you need to let that guilt go. You didn't destroy anyone's family. You told your truth. What people do with that truth is their responsibility, not yours. But what if people are making bad decisions based on my story? What if someone leaves a relationship that could have been saved? What if someone leaves a relationship that was slowly killing them? Dr. Chun countered. Evelyn, you can't carry the weight of everyone's life decisions. You can only be honest about yours. I knew she was right. But the guilt lingered anyway. By January, 18 months after that first video went viral, I had become something I never intended to become, a public figure. I had 500,000 followers on Instagram. My TikToks were getting millions of views. People stopped me on the street to tell me my story had changed their lives. Universities wanted me to speak to their students about trauma and recovery. Organizations were asking me to do consulting work on abuse prevention. It was overwhelming. It was validating. It was exhausting. And somewhere in the midst of all of it, I realized I was losing myself again. Not in the same way I had with James and Carol, but in a different way. I was becoming the woman people thought I was, the survivor, the voice, the woman who had it all figured out. And I was losing the woman who was still figuring things out, who still had bad days, who still struggled sometimes. I was becoming a symbol instead of remaining a person. So I made a decision. I scaled back. I stopped doing interviews. I deleted most of my social media accounts. I stopped reading the comments. I declined speaking engagements. I told my agent that I needed to step away from the public eye. But you're at the peak of your career, she protested. This is when you capitalize. Capitalize on what? I asked. On my trauma? On my pain? I didn't share my story to become famous. I shared it to help people understand that they weren't alone. And I've done that. Now I need to focus on being alone, just me with myself, for a while. It was terrifying. Part of me worried that if I stepped away, people would forget about me. That my story would lose its relevance. That I'd disappear back into obscurity. But another part of me, the part that had learned to listen to my own voice, knew that I needed this. I gave my resignation letter to the school in February. Not because I didn't love teaching. I did. But I realized that I was teaching while also managing the aftermath of viral fame, while also going through a book tour, while also processing the trauma of the past 2 years. I was spread too thin. I need a break, I told my principal. I need to not be responsible for anyone else's learning or well-being for a while. I need to focus on myself. She understood. She told me I could come back whenever I was ready. That my job would be waiting for me. That was the gift I needed. The knowledge that I could step away without losing everything. That I had options. That my worth wasn't tied to my productivity or my visibility. In March, I moved to a small cottage by the ocean in Maine. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't announce it on social media or tell the press. I just packed a bag and left. I left behind the apartment I'd shared with James. I left behind the city where everyone knew my story. I left behind the identity of the woman whose mother-in-law tried to poison her. The cottage was small and quiet. It had a kitchen where I could cook without anyone filming me. A bedroom where I could sleep without worrying about what people on the internet were saying about me. A porch where I could sit and watch the ocean and think about nothing at all. For the first time in 2 years, I was completely alone. And it was the most healing thing I could have done. I read books for pleasure. I painted. I journaled. I took long walks on the beach where nobody recognized me. I cooked elaborate meals just for myself. I sat in silence and let my mind quiet down for the first time since this all began. And slowly, very slowly, I started to remember who I was underneath all the trauma and the fame and the responsibility of being a symbol. I was Evelyn. Just Evelyn. A woman who loved to read and paint and cook and think about the world. A woman who had survived something terrible but wasn't defined by that survival. A woman who was allowed to be ordinary. A woman who was allowed to take up space even if she wasn't constantly producing content or changing the world. I was allowed to just exist. One afternoon in April, I was sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the waves, and I realized something profound. I had finally forgiven myself. Not for going public with my story. That had been necessary and brave. But for all the years I'd spent doubting myself, for all the times I'd believed Carol and James when they told me I was crazy, for all the ways I'd twisted myself into shapes I didn't fit in order to be loved. I forgave myself for all of that. And in that forgiveness, I found something I'd been searching for my entire journey: peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. The kind that comes from finally knowing, deep in your bones, that you were never the problem. That you were always enough. That the only person whose approval you need is your own. I pulled out my phone and I recorded one final video. Not for the millions of people watching online. But for me. I'm okay, I said to the camera, and I meant it. After everything, the gaslighting, the poisoning, the viral fame, the book, the interviews, I'm okay. I'm more than okay. I'm home. I didn't upload that video. I saved it to my phone and watched it on nights when I needed to remember who I'd become. And that was enough. 6 months into my life at the cottage, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Maya, the girl who had come to my office hours and told me that my story had changed her life. She'd written me a handwritten letter, actual pen and paper, not an email, and somehow it had found its way to my cottage address. I never told anyone where I was living, so I can only assume it went through my publisher. The letter was 6 pages long, and I cried reading every word. She wrote about her life after leaving her boyfriend. About how she was thriving. About how she was applying to colleges, taking art classes, rediscovering who she was outside of a relationship. She wrote about her mother, who had also left her own toxic situation inspired by watching my videos, and how the two of them were healing together. You saved my life, she wrote. And I know you probably don't think of it that way, because you were just telling your story. But for me, you were a lifeline. You were proof that it was possible to leave, to survive, to become someone new. She ended the letter with, I hope you're okay now. I hope you've found peace. You deserve it more than anyone I know. I read that letter sitting on my porch overlooking the ocean, and I let myself cry, not sad tears, but the kind that come when you realize your pain has meaning. When you understand that by being vulnerable, by being brave, you've actually changed someone's life. That night, I called Sarah for the first time in months. I'm thinking about going back, I told her. Back where? To the city. Back to teaching. Back to having some kind of presence in the world. But on my terms this time. Not because I'm running from something. But because I want to. Sarah was quiet for a moment. How do you feel about that? Scared, I admitted. But also, ready. I've spent 6 months being quiet. Being invisible. And it was exactly what I needed. But I'm starting to realize that I don't want to hide forever. I just want to live deliberately. Intentionally. Making choices that feel right for me, not because the world is demanding them of me. That sounds healthy, Sarah said. That sounds like real healing. In July, I started getting ready to leave the cottage. Not immediately. I wasn't ready for that yet. But I started thinking about the next chapter. I reached out to my principal and asked if I could return to teaching part-time in the fall. She said yes immediately. We've missed you, she told me. But I'm glad you took the time you needed. I also started thinking about my platform differently. The memoir had sold over 2 million copies worldwide. My videos had been viewed by hundreds of millions of people. I had become, in a very real way, a voice for people experiencing abuse and gaslighting. But I'd also learned that I didn't have to be constantly available, constantly producing, constantly performing my pain in order to be valuable. I decided to create something new. Not a daily video. Not hourly content. But something meaningful. Something I could do from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of desperation or trauma. I started working on a series of short documentary-style videos about women who had left toxic situations. Not just romantic relationships, but family dynamics, friendships, work situations. I wanted to show the full spectrum of how manipulation and abuse can show up in different forms. I didn't rush it. I interviewed women slowly, carefully, with their full consent and understanding of what the videos would be used for. I let their stories breathe. I didn't try to sensationalize anything. I just let them be real. And somewhere in that process, I found a new relationship to my platform. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about giving voice to other people's truths. It was about creating a space where women could see themselves reflected without fear of judgment. In August, James reached out. We'd had minimal contact since he moved out. A few awkward text exchanges. The occasional update through mutual friends. But he'd been doing his own healing work, and he wanted to meet with me in person. We met at a coffee shop in Portland, neutral ground, far from our shared history. He looked good. Healthier than I'd ever seen him. There was a calmness about him that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to apologize," he said, after we'd ordered our coffee. "Properly. Not in a text or a note, but in person." "Okay," I said, and I waited. "I failed you," he continued. "When you needed me most, I chose my mother over you. And then, even when the evidence was undeniable, I still couldn't let go of the guilt and shame of that failure. I made your recovery about my healing instead of just supporting yours. I'm sorry." I listened to him, and I realized something. His apology meant very little to me now. Not because it wasn't sincere, I believed it was. But because I'd spent enough time in therapy to understand that his apology couldn't fix what had broken between us. That healing didn't require his participation or his permission. "I forgive you," I said, and I meant it. "And I hope you find peace with everything that's happened. But I need you to understand that forgiving you doesn't mean we're going to be together. It doesn't mean we can go back to what we were. Too much has changed." "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not here asking for that. I'm here to acknowledge that I hurt you. And to say that I'm sorry." We talked for another hour. We talked about therapy, about how we were both healing, about the ways this experience had changed us. And when we left that coffee shop, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The last piece of the past, finally released. He would always be part of my story. But he was no longer defining it. In September, I returned to teaching. Walking back into the classroom for the first time in 8 months felt surreal. My principal had held my position. My desk was exactly as I'd left it, with my books and my coffee mug and my collection of student essays. I had a new class of juniors, none of whom had been in my class before I left. I made a conscious decision not to tell them about my story. If they recognized me from the videos or the book, they could make that connection themselves. But I wasn't going to announce it or use it as a way to build credibility. However, I was different with them. I was more authentic. When we discussed literature, I talked about how stories shape us, how narratives can be weaponized, how important it is to recognize your own truth even when the world tells you something different. I assigned them a project where they had to write about a time when their reality was questioned by someone they trusted. The responses were overwhelming. Students wrote about parents who told them they were lazy when they were struggling with depression. About friends who gaslit them into believing they'd done things they hadn't. About relationships where they felt constantly doubted and minimized. One student, a quiet girl named Jessica, wrote about her mother's boyfriend, who had systematically convinced her that she was overreacting to his boundary violations. She wrote about how she'd started to doubt herself, to wonder if maybe she was the problem. But then, she wrote at the end, "I watched this video about a woman who survived something similar, and she said something that changed my mind: trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is." And I did. I trusted myself. I told my mom what was happening, and she believed me, and we got away from him. I'm writing this to say thank you to that woman. Thank you for showing me that I was right to trust myself. I read that essay and I cried at my desk after school. This was why I'd done it. This was why I'd put my trauma on the internet, why I'd written the memoir, why I'd shared the most painful parts of my life. Because somewhere out there, someone needed to hear that they weren't crazy. That their instincts mattered. That they could trust themselves. That night, I sat down and I started writing chapter 10. The final chapter. The one where I would bring everything full circle. The one where I would take everything I'd learned and distill it into something meaningful, something that could serve as a message of empowerment to everyone who had followed my journey. I thought about the path that had brought me here. The 6 years of being gaslit by my husband and mother-in-law. The moment I pressed record on my phone. The viral video that changed everything. The book. The speaking engagements. The overwhelming fame. The breakdown. The retreat. The slow, painful process of rebuilding myself. And I realized something: this wasn't just my story anymore. This was a story about what it takes to reclaim your power. What it takes to believe in yourself when no one else does. What it takes to choose yourself, even when that choice costs you everything. I wasn't a victim. I was a survivor. And survivors had a responsibility, not to everyone but to themselves, to use their survival as proof that recovery was possible. I pulled out my laptop and I began to write the words that would conclude this chapter of my life. The chapter where Evelyn Bennett, a woman who had been told she was crazy, would finally tell the truth about what it meant to be sane in an insane world. What it meant to choose yourself. What it meant to take back your power. And I knew, as I typed these words, that this final chapter would be the most important one. Because it wasn't about what had happened to me. It was about what I was going to do with what had happened to me. It was about transformation. Today marks 2 years since I pressed record on that video. 2 years since I captured my mother-in-law's attempt to poison me on camera. 2 years since my life exploded into a million pieces and was somehow reconstructed into something stronger, something more honest, something more real. I'm sitting in my cottage overlooking the ocean as I write this, and I'm thinking about the woman I was 2 years ago. The woman who was so afraid of losing her marriage that she was willing to lose herself instead. The woman who doubted her own reality because the man she loved told her to. The woman who smiled and apologized and made herself smaller and smaller until she was barely visible at all. That woman doesn't exist anymore. And I want to talk to you about how that happened. Not because I think my journey is special or unique, because it's not. Millions of women are living versions of my story right now. But because I think what I've learned might matter to someone watching this who is where I was. Someone who is doubting their sanity. Someone who is being told they're overreacting. Someone who is slowly disappearing inside a relationship or a family dynamic or a friendship that is supposed to love them. I want to tell you what I learned about power. About choice. About what it really means to take your life back. The first thing I learned is this: you are not crazy. If someone is telling you that you're overreacting, that you're being paranoid, that you're misremembering things that you clearly remember, they are gaslighting you. And gaslighting is abuse. It's a form of psychological manipulation designed to make you question your own reality, and it's incredibly effective because it uses your love against you. When James told me I was being paranoid about his mother, it felt like a betrayal because it was a betrayal. He was choosing to not believe my lived experience. He was choosing his mother's narrative over my truth. And every single time he did that, I lost a little bit more of myself. I want you to know, you are not crazy for noticing patterns. You are not paranoid for setting boundaries. You are not overreacting for being hurt by someone's behavior. Your perception is valid. Your feelings are real. Your instincts matter. The people who are the most skilled at manipulation will make you feel like you're the one with the problem. They'll cry when you confront them. They'll play the victim. They'll tell you that you're the toxic one, the unstable one, the one destroying the relationship. But here's what I learned: people who are truly secure in their behavior don't need to gaslight you about it. If you're constantly being told you're crazy, there's a reason for that. And the reason isn't because you are. The second thing I learned is this: choosing yourself is not selfish. For 6 years, I put James's needs before my own. I made excuses for his mother. I tried to fix a relationship that was fundamentally broken. I twisted myself into shapes that didn't fit because I believed that love meant sacrifice. That marriage meant accepting toxicity in the name of commitment. When I finally chose myself, when I decided that my mental health, my reality, my sanity mattered more than preserving a relationship with someone who didn't believe in me, I was terrified. I thought I was being selfish. I thought I was failing at marriage. I thought I was betraying the promises I'd made. But here's what I understand now. The promise I made to James wasn't to stay even if it was destroying me. The promise was to build a life together based on trust, respect, and love. And when that promise was broken, not by me, but by him choosing not to believe me, I had the right to leave. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Choosing yourself is survival. Some people will call you selfish for leaving. Some people will tell you that you're being dramatic, that you should have tried harder, that you should have compromised more. Let them. Because the people who love you, the people who really matter, will understand that you were drowning. They'll understand that you had to save yourself. They'll respect you for it. The third thing I learned is this: your story matters. I almost didn't share my video. I almost deleted it. I almost kept my trauma private, thinking that by staying silent, I could somehow protect my marriage, protect my husband's reputation, protect his mother from the consequences of her actions. But silence is how abuse thrives. Silence is how manipulation continues. Silence is how people like Carol get to stay in power, because nobody is brave enough to say the truth out loud. When I decided to share my story publicly, I wasn't doing it for attention or for fame. I was doing it because I realized that my silence was complicity. If my story could help one person, just one, escape a toxic situation, then the cost to my privacy was worth it. And it did. It helped thousands of people. Women left abusive relationships. Women called police on people who were hurting them. Women finally gave themselves permission to believe their own reality. And it all started because I was brave enough to say, "This happened to me, and I'm not ashamed anymore." Your story matters. Not because it's dramatic or because it will go viral, but because it's true. Your lived experience has value. The things you've survived, the things you've learned, the ways you've grown, they matter. And if you ever get the chance to share them, to help someone else understand that they're not alone, I would encourage you to do it. Because the world needs your truth right now. But here's the most important thing I learned, and I want you to really hear this. You don't need permission to believe yourself. You don't need a video. You don't need a lawyer. You don't need a jury or a judge or a therapist or your best friend to validate your reality. You don't need external proof that you're not crazy. Your own knowledge of what happened to you is enough. I spent years waiting for James to believe me. I spent years trying to prove my reality to someone who had already decided I was lying. And it wasn't until I stopped needing him to validate my experience that I actually started to heal. Your gut knows the truth. Your body knows when something is wrong. Your instincts have been protecting you your entire life. And if you've learned to override those instincts because someone told you to, I want you to start listening to them again. Trust yourself. Not because you're always right about everything, but because your perception of your own life is the only one that actually matters. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you're being gaslit, if you're being told you're crazy, if you're slowly disappearing inside a relationship that's supposed to love you, I want you to know something. You have options. You can leave. You can call the police. You can tell someone. You can record the evidence. You can seek help. You can choose yourself. It won't be easy. It will cost you things. You might lose relationships. Your family might not believe you. You might lose financial stability. You might have to rebuild your entire life from nothing. But on the other side of that pain, there is freedom. There is the discovery of who you are when you're not trying to be what someone else needs you to be. There is peace. There is the possibility of a future that doesn't include someone systematically destroying your sense of reality. And that's worth everything. I'm not saying this because I'm an expert. I'm saying this because I'm a woman who lived it. I'm a woman who was told she was crazy and believed it. I'm a woman who almost lost herself completely. But I didn't. I survived. I spoke up. I chose myself. And now I'm living a life that's authentically mine. And you can too. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to say something to everyone who has been part of this journey with me. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing me to be vulnerable in front of you. Thank you for sharing your own stories, for trusting me with your trauma, for letting me know that my pain had meaning. This is the end of the story I wanted to tell. But it's not the end of my healing. Healing isn't linear. Healing isn't something you finish. Healing is something you do every single day, choosing yourself over and over again, believing your own reality over and over again, trusting yourself even when it's hard. I'm going back to teaching. I'm going back to living a quiet life. I'm going back to being a person instead of a symbol. But I'm not going back to being silent. I'm not going back to doubting myself. I'm not going back to making myself smaller so that other people feel comfortable. I'm staying exactly as I am, a survivor. A voice. A woman who knows her own truth and refuses to apologize for it. And if my story helped you find your own voice, if it helped you believe yourself, if it helped you choose yourself, then everything I've been through was worth it. If you've been watching this story and it resonated with you, I need you to do 2 things. First, subscribe to this channel. More stories like this are coming. Stories of women who survived. Stories of women who chose themselves. Stories of women who are reclaiming their power. Subscribe so you don't miss them. Second, like this video. Because every like, every share, every comment helps this message reach more people. It helps other women find the courage they need to believe themselves, to set boundaries, to choose themselves. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You deserve to be believed. And your life matters. Thank you for being here with me on this journey. I'm Evelyn Bennett, and I'm finally home.